that on? Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Freddie. Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. Before I start, just like to say a great big thank you to Freddie and Alicia and the Conduit for initiating this, actually, and helping us to put this on. So it's fantastic. Thank you for hosting us. Really looking forward to it. And thank you so much as well for bringing some great organisations together. I mean, I would say that. I'm one of them, well, with one of them. So I'll introduce our panellists in a moment, but as Freddie said, we've got Wateraid here, Bellew, and 1001 Fontaines, who will hopefully, I'm sure, take us through a really stimulating discussion in a few moments. And thank you all for coming out as well. We won't mention the dreaded word, but we know that numbers are high right now, and really appreciate you all for making the effort to come out and be part of this. And for those online who are able to join us as well, thank you. So, as I said, I'll introduce everyone in a moment, but just a few words of why we're here tonight. I'm really pleased to see that there's such an amazing array of organisations in the room tonight, and the importance of that is that it will give us a great diversity of views and thoughts, and that's why we're here, really, is to harness that diversity of thought and to see how we can use that to explore the relationship between collective community action and climate change and its impact on water security. The impact of climate change on water is something that you see less so in our headlines, I would say, but for millions of communities around the world, this problem is threatening their drinking water supplies and their sanitation, putting lives at risk. And at Wateraid, which is the organisation I'm part of, sustainable solutions, resilient infrastructure is core to what we do and is at the heart of everything. So this evening we'll be discussing how that collective action can and has the power to address the impact of climate change on a water-stressed world. And in a few minutes we'll hear from each of our panellists on their views on how that collective community action can help us address water security, but also to think about the short and long-term impacts of climate change on water. So following the panel discussion, we will pause for a few moments so you to refresh your glasses and to have a short break. And then we'd ask you all to come back to your tables so that we can start our solution circle discussion. And there'll be members of Wateraid and 1001 Fontaines on the tables to help you do that. And I'll talk you through that a little bit more as we're coming up. So for now, I will introduce our panellists. I'm probably going to need my glasses on, actually, so I don't think I can remember all of your amazing accolades. So, joining us from Wateraid, at the end we have Claire Seawood, who's the Global Campaigns Director. So Wateraid is an international NGO specialising in water sanitation and hygiene, and since its inception in 1981, across the 28 countries where we work, we've reached directly 28 million people with clean water. And we've influenced even further than that to ensure more people can access clean water and sanitation. And that's partly where Claire comes in. So in Claire's role, she leads the strategic direction of our global advocacy work, creating, scaling up, influencing and capacity and impact across our country programmes. Prior to Wateraid, Claire led Oxfam's campaign and policy strategy for the major humanitarian responses such as Syrian and Typhoon Haiyan. So welcome, Claire. Thank you. Oh, great, you sat in order. We didn't plan this. This is excellent. Well done. Thank you. We're also joined by Natalie Campbell, MBE. It's important to say that. Natalie is an award-winning social entrepreneur and broadcaster, and she's co-founded a global social innovation company called A Very Good Company. Great name. Working with household names that we would all be familiar with. But she's here tonight in her role as co-CEO of Bellew Water. So for those who are less familiar, Baloo is a drinks business that puts people and the environment first and has been an amazing supporter of Wateraid right from its inception. So thank you very much for joining us, Natalie. I really appreciate it. And then finally, on to Rosemary. Oh gosh, lost it. Oh no. You might have to help me out here, Rosemary. Rosemary joins us from 1001 Fontaines, of where she's chair. She spent her career in Accenture and then helped bring 1001 Fontaines to the UK only last year, I believe. 1001 Fontaines is an international NGO similar to Wateraid, focusing in South Asia and Madagascar, working on fantastic entrepreneur solutions such as mobile water kiosks, and working with schools right across that region to bring clean, safe drinking water. Have I covered everything?
Yes, thank you.
Amazing.
Perfectly.
Great. So let's move on to the panel discussion. So, Claire, perhaps you could kick us off. Could you please explain for us all the intersection between a changing climate and access to water, sanitation and hygiene for people?
Thank you. It's an issue that, as Jenny said, doesn't get enough discussion. We're only really starting to see some of those connections and conversations coming through now. And it's really about the fact that increasing, and we're seeing on the news every day, that there are communities on the front line who are getting hit harder and more regularly by climate change. And what this means is that they're really struggling to get the foundations and the basics in place. And when water is life, it's the start of everything. It's about how do we make sure that those communities are not only able to survive, but actually thrive. How do we better plan for what's coming? And how do we make sure they have those foundations in place as there's a changing climate, to make sure you have the water, the sanitation, hygiene you need to be healthy, to thrive and to prosper. And it's really starting to spark conversations about how you do that well. For example, today, Wateraid released a report on groundwater, so looking at the aquifers under the ground and what resources are there. And actually, it really finds that actually there's potentially a lot of water underneath, particularly Africa, below the Saharan desert, that you could tap into, but it has to be done well. And the key thing here is about sustainability, and it's to see it as a buffer. So we can learn lessons from, say, Asia, where they've been really overusing water sources, which has actually left communities really vulnerable at a time when they need it most, because you're seeing the impacts of climate change. So how do we make sure that communities can plan for the future, given the challenges they're going to see, in a way that keeps them healthy and can grow and prosper?
Wonderful, thank you. Rosemary, why is water part of the climate conversation?
Well, maybe it's also a question of why it isn't more prominent in the climate conversation. I was just reading the other day that a very, very small percentage of climate finance, around 1%, goes to water. And when we talk about climate change, we're looking at droughts, we're looking at flooding, we're looking at the melting of the polar ice, we're looking at impact on oceans. So water really should be at the heart of the climate discussion. And we're already seeing the effects of climate change on water. It's really disrupting the whole supply value chain. So on the supply side, obviously droughts, depletion of groundwater is disrupting supply. On the demand side, events like storms are increasing the demand for water because they often destroy fragile infrastructures. If those demands for drinking water, safe drinking water, are unmet, there is a risk that we encourage migration into urban centres, which makes the whole issue even more exacerbated. I think in the future, two issues that are going to be quite important with respect to water are water quality and water affordability. When you think of floods that contaminate water, and then the increasing salinity of groundwater, it means the water is getting more contaminated, and the treatment costs are going to go up and potentially affect affordability. So we have a lot of issues to contend with looking towards the future.
Yeah, multiple things. And obviously, Natalie, Claire and Rosemary have stated so many reasons why it's important. But why is access to water and sanitation so important to Baloo?
Yeah, so I'm in a privileged position in that I'm not the founder of Blue. I inherited a business that already had water as a powerful resource at the core of its business. And it's important for us, initially, our founder was absolutely furious at the fact that you'd go to a restaurant and you'd drink imported water. And he just said, this is wrong. Why are we shipping water all over the world? And so that tenet has run through the core of Baloo since 2002. 10 years ago, or just over 10 years ago, our CEO at the time, Carol Lynch, formed a partnership with Wateraid because she realised that actually in drinking water, we could support vulnerable communities all over the world get access to clean water. And so in the pursuit of drinking water at a restaurant or at home, people could be doing good elsewhere. And so when you bring those two things together, for us as a business, it now underpins everything that we do. Our purpose now is to change the way the world sees water, because we've realised that actually we need businesses to stand behind SDG 6. Water is life. And for some reason, we don't seem to see the connection between the scarcity of water, the abundance of water, and the impact it has on our ability to live well wherever we are in the world. And so for us at Blue, we have conversations about water every single day because we sell it. Not just in bottles, but also we've moved into filtration. And what we're trying to do is then build an ecosystem of other drinks businesses that think about how they operate to then do good within the realm of drinks and specifically water.
Thank you. It's fantastic. Claire, I've used the term water security a few times tonight, but what is it? And what is it particularly in relation to climate change? And I suppose the important question here is, how is it relevant for communities to build their resilience, and how does it impact people?
I mean, ultimately, water security is really about making sure there is a sustainable, ongoing supply of water that is available to communities to use, and that can withstand the ebb and flows of environment and other factors, whether that's pollution, whether that's investment. It's about making sure that is sustained throughout. And really, when you get to climate change, as kind of been said, when you have floods, you have cyclones, you're really getting, and particularly with increased intensity that we're seeing, it really is a threat to water security. It means that very practically you have drinking water that becomes salinated when you have something in Bangladesh, or it can be that literally infrastructure gets destroyed. And so how does a community make sure they have that ongoing sustainable supply of water throughout? And that it really comes down to the basics of how we're looking at our adaptation going forward, planning going forward, and whether that's a community or a business or whatever it is, we all have to do that planning going forward. But communities have some of the least skills or resources to be able to do that well, and that's where really focusing on getting that sustainable supply is key.
And Rosemary, 1001 Fontaines works in Southeast Asia, as we heard, and Madagascar, but for the communities that you work with, that are vulnerable to these water security risks. Can you tell us a little bit more about them and the impact on them?
Well, unfortunately, we're seeing the impact every day as we work in the field of water security issues on vulnerable communities. So, for example, in Vietnam, the Mekong Delta is literally sinking into the ocean, and salt water is coming further inland. The result of that contamination, the salinity in the water, means that a lot of people are being deprived of access to safe water because the existing treatment infrastructures can't necessarily cope with that contamination. In Cambodia, where we've been working since 2005, when we started there, from then until sort of the mid-2010s, there was a very predictable pattern in the weather. So it was a 6-month dry season, a 6-month rainy season. But in the past few years, that whole pattern has been disrupted. It's become completely unpredictable. And so people are constantly in emergency mode, trying to cope with these unpredictable events. So obviously the extension of the dry season and droughts means that supply of water is less, and then the severe flooding is disrupting supply chains, making it more difficult to distribute water, especially in very remote communities.
Yeah, we're seeing an ongoing humanitarian crisis day after day, aren't we, that doesn't seem to let up. But Natalie, Baloo is a water company, so have you faced risks in relation to water, and how could it continue? How can Baloo continue if there was inconsistent water access?
Yeah, I think, again, when we wake up in the morning, we have the privilege of being able to switch on a tap or have a shower. And what we don't think about is, what if you did that tomorrow and actually nothing came out? That's not impossible. That is a very real probability. And so we've been working with our source and actually with other partners to think about how we can contribute to understanding the water crisis and issues related to water in the UK. So one of the things that we're going to do or stop doing is, instead of buying carbon credits as part of our carbon management programme, we're going to invest in climate resilience initiatives here in the UK related to the area around our source. And so working with our source partners and the telemetry that they have, understanding what the right level of extraction is to support the local infrastructure, and then build resilience around the canals and waterways, so that we can start to think about water as more of an ecosystem. The other thing that I think people don't realise when we're talking about waste material in oceans is a lot of the material, I'm going to get this figure wrong, someone will tell me the right one, I'm sure, but 99% of the the waste produce, commercial waste produce that ends up in oceans starts in a river or canal. And so if we can do more to stop that as part of our work, then again, the whole conversation around the ecosystem and pollution changes. So we've gone on a journey of thinking about where we spend our carbon credit investments to ensure that there is a better conversation close to home related to water and water scarcity. And then we're also challenging the drinks industry to do better. In a number of breweries, the water wastage is really high. Actually, we should be investing in sustainable drinks facilities so that wastage absolutely goes down. You shouldn't use 3 litres of water to create a 500 ml drink. It just doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to engage with the drinks industry, to show them that, again, I'm going to say SDG 6, the SDG 6 is one that they should get behind and really champion as a core part of their operating model.
Yeah, and it's quite scary how close it sometimes feels like it's getting to us, but still not something that is always on our mind in the UK because of what we feel is the abundance of clean water in our country. So Claire, Wateraid is obviously working with communities. So how are we working with them to mitigate against the impact of climate change on water, sanitation and hygiene, I suppose?
Yeah, and I think we're doing some really interesting different work in different countries. So, for example, in Tanzania, we're looking a lot with communities to look at how we actually set up our water points to be able to reduce our own emissions, because we also have a responsibility to do that. So with solar panels in terms of how we access and draw up water from pumps and looking at that side of things. When you go to somewhere like Bangladesh, we're actually spending a lot of time with the local communities and the local government starting to plan what infrastructure needs to be in place for the next time it floods, because there will always be a next time and more frequently. And how do we need to build and prepare water systems to be able to respond better, and sanitation, because that's where a lot of the pollution happens ultimately. If you look on the other extreme and look at drought, say in Ghana, what we're actually doing is we're actually sitting down with communities and industry and agriculture who all need the water, but where it's actually drying out, and actually starting to collectively plan. So everyone's needs for the water get pulled in together, and between them all, they're starting to manage how to extract and use the water in a way that's sustainable and that can meet everyone's needs, because the risk is quite often that the community's own household needs get last dibs on the water, and actually it's about how do we plan and build that in better so everyone gets what they need.
Yeah. And how, Rosemary, are 1001 Fontaines preparing communities for the effects of climate change?
Well, resilience has come up as a topic many times already. And resilience to climate change and the effects on water is becoming a real concern in Cambodia. I'll just use that as an example. It's estimated that about 50% of the rural communities in Cambodia are either moderately or highly exposed to water shortages because of climate change. And then in areas which are unserved by water services, the dwindling water resources discourage any investment in those areas. So it's a snowballing type of problem. With 1001 Fontaine, we've come up with a number of mitigation strategies. So in times of floods, our entrepreneurs actually rent boats and deliver water to their communities. Our water kiosks themselves are above ground and well connected to the road systems. So they generally are able to resist flooding. On the other hand, in times of drought, we've come up with a drought mitigation plan whereby an entrepreneur whose water source has dried up can secure water from another kiosk or another source, and they are able to continue providing service as a result of that. We've been using that that drought mitigation strategy since 2019, and it has enabled us to continue operations in 85% of our sites, even in times of droughts. But that's sort of an emergency response, and it's efficient in some sense, but it's not sufficient. We've realized that we need to have other adaptation strategies, such as being more stringent in looking at the resilience of the water sources when we're choosing a new site for a kiosk, and also supplementing the resilience of existing water sources by, for example, harvesting more water in times of plenty and storing water for longer in times of drought. We recognize that we're just at the start of an adaptation strategy.
Great. And Natalie, we may have already covered this, but we talked a little while ago about what you're doing to tackle climate risks and the impact on Baloo. Is there anything more you'd like to build on that for us?
Only to say, because I know there might be a conversation about governance, one of the things that we've done at Baloo is embed the SDGs into our articles. So instead of delivering shareholder value, actually I am performance managed against, and our objects are to deliver SDGs 6, 12 and 13. We support all 17, but the 3 that we have a focus on is ultimately WASH, responsible consumption and climate action. And so everything that we do is built around our ability to make a change there. And sitting here and listening to you all, this is why we get out of bed in the morning. Looking at Sal, this is why we do what we do. I feel privileged to be in a business where we can give all of our net profit, not 1%, 100% of our net profit goes to Wateraid. Our accounts are audited. You can see every penny that runs through the business, and we're publishing our impact report in a month, where we're going to go into even more detail about what we've spent. So you'll see what we spent on brand, you'll see what we spent on the team, you see what we spend on overheads, and then what we give to Wateraid to really further that mission. And for us, it's a call to action to other businesses to say, yes, capitalism is capitalism, fine. But what if you created your business with a different model? What if you created your business to tackle the world's biggest problems from the outset? Our founder, Reed Paget, could have set up a charity. He would have just been competing with organisations that do it 1,000,000 times better than he ever could. Instead, he created a business that sells something that people want and need, and is therefore challenging the big brands that aren't doing as much, and therefore giving sustainable revenue to organisations that we know and we believe in. In pre-pandemic, that was £1 million. Selling to the hospitality industry then changed things. But we want to get back to that place where we know that we are changing hearts and minds. We're making a difference from an environmental perspective. We're making a difference to communities all over the world that should have access to clean water.
And it's such an inspirational business model.
I really do. I do feel privileged. I feel privileged because I'm in a business where we've got the agility to, have an idea on Monday and make it happen on Tuesday, much to the detriment of the team sometimes. But at the same time, we're always doing that because of the greater good. And it does come back to what is the greater good. So there are lots of things that we don't do. So you won't pick us up in grocery or retail because we don't feel like that's where we need to be. But in hospitality, where there is people do buy bottled water, or there's a sustainable water service in filtered water, that's exactly where Blue needs to be. We've moved into tonics and mixers because if you look at any of the brands out there, they're not particularly doing very much for the planet or for people. And so we saw that as an opportunity to disrupt things. And it brings me so much joy to do this.
And you talk about the importance of your customers, your partners. But who do you think is responsible to govern and ensure water security for all? Is it businesses, NGOs?
I think it's a whole ecosystem. I don't believe that NGOs and governments can do it in isolation without businesses' support, because if you look at who's using water, who's using a lot of water, who's using water in a wasteful manner, all to ultimately make money, it's business. If you think about the infrastructure within the UK or elsewhere in the world, ultimately it all connects back into business somewhere. So if businesses don't understand the relationship that they have with water, water scarcity, water poverty, then no matter what inputs we have from other organisations, there's always going to be someone in the ecosystem that just doesn't care enough to make the changes that they need to. And so I do think that business has a huge role to play.
Yeah. And Rosemary, thinking about those different actors, how does 1001 Fontaines hold them accountable?
Well, as Natalie was just saying, businesses have a key role to play, and partnerships and diversity and complementarity of water solutions are absolutely critical if we're ever going to have universal access to water according to the requirements of SDG 6. So just a couple of examples of partnerships that we're working on in Cambodia. So UNICEF Cambodia is funding our drought mitigation plan, and for existing kiosks and supporting the deployment of new kiosks. The Ministry of the Environment is also supporting the drought mitigation plan and is putting climate resilience as a key criterion for choosing and supporting new water supply solutions. We've been working with Wateraid and a number of local partners in Cambodia to look at how can we really make a step change in reaching the SDG 6 goal. So tomorrow, World Water Day, we will publish a joint paper, and the paper has a very specific action plan for governments. It's particularly targeted at governments. And the key message really in there is that if we're ever going to reach universal access, we really need to leverage the complementarity of different water supply solutions. And we've also emphasized the need to make climate resilience a key element of every single water project going forward.
And Claire, Wateraid has just launched its new 10-year strategy in which influencing plays a much bigger part than ever before for the organisation. Obviously, this is a key part of your role. So a similar question to you. How Wateraid influencing and holding actors to account?
I mean, I think it coalesces around two main issues. One is investment and one is good water stewardship. And in terms of water stewardship, I mean, as has been said, you can't have one actor doing it all. Like if you went to a government and said, here's $10 million to invest in improving water and sanitation hygiene, they probably wouldn't in themselves have the level of detail to be able to say this is where it needs to go. It relies on businesses who have local knowledge, who have supply chain information, who have risk assessment information. And it's about bringing together all of that information together to be able to create plans and to be able to then hold everyone to account for that. Mm-hmm. And in terms of investment, governments will put in money, but most of the governments that are really on the front line of climate change don't have the level of resources they need. And it really requires a real range of investment. And I think, as you were kind of saying, in terms of business, it's really about investing in a whole ecosystem and cycle and sustainable development. When you're looking at a business, how do you invest in a way that thinks not only about your core business, but also the impact in the environment and how that investment builds in with other sources of investment that are going on in country as well. How do you bring all of that together? And so you do really need to hold all of those different entities to account.
And obviously when we break into our solution circle, we're going to be thinking a little bit more about actions and solutions that are needed to encourage increased collective investment and collective ownership of the challenges. Natalie, how can business become more purpose-driven?
I would say this, but I think it starts with governance. I think it's great that businesses are saying, we're purpose-led, but I'm going to look at your governing documents to work out where your purpose really lies, because if your governing documents say that we're here to deliver shareholder value, first and foremost, then I'm going to argue that when your back's against the wall, you're not going to deliver against your purpose, you're going to deliver for your shareholders, and that will mean cutting specific corners in pursuit of financial return. So that's my first challenge. I would say the second challenge is then at the point where you're saying, this is our purpose, we are purpose-led, what partnerships are in place that really enable you to demonstrate that? And what I hope is that businesses don't act all heuristically and with ego and go, right, and we're going to solve it too, that you put the partnerships in place and you work with people that can actually deliver change, and you have a relationship of challenge to push each other to go further. We wouldn't have changed our purpose, changing the way the world sees water, if we didn't have a 10-year partnership as in going forward to 2030 with Wateraid. We know we can do it because of our partnerships. And so making sure that those partnerships, collaborations are in place, and they're not to compete. We'll work with anyone in any industry. We open source everything. Our impact report's open source. Our accounts are there. You can see what we do. We don't hide anything. There's no secret sauce to Baloo. We'll give it away because we want all businesses to do better. And so then in being purpose-led, surely part of your purpose should be to get other people to do things differently and better. And if you can then give away how to do that, that's key and core. That non-competitive nature is not intrinsic to how businesses have been built. And then lastly, it's then aligning everyone, all people internally, partners, supply chain, around said purpose, so that there isn't anyone in the ecosystem that doesn't know what we know, that doesn't, there shouldn't be anyone in our tent that doesn't believe what we believe, because then we won't get the best outputs. I'm really proud of the fact that all of our partners are thinking about renewable energy, they're thinking about their own carbon impacts, they're thinking about their own partnerships, they're thinking about what they can do with Wateraid. And these are live discussions that we have, so it just makes our jobs much easier. And I haven't necessarily put the framework in the right order, but Baloo's internal framework or our theory of change is purpose, people, product, and then profit. And if we get the first 3 right, then the profit will return, and then that goes back into our purpose, and the journey starts again. And so I can't overstate the fact that I inherited a business that was built in this way. I know it's difficult if you've inherited a business that was built in the old, I'm going to say the old model, the outdated model, and you're trying to take it on a change journey. But if you are building a business from scratch, I think the opportunity is ripe to do it in a way that's fit for the next century that we're heading into.
Thank you. Rosemary, obviously 1001 Fontaines model is all around social entrepreneurship, but what is the role of social entrepreneurship and microfinancing in driving action?
Well, I think social businesses can really play a major role in attracting new investment into the sector. I mean, typically social entrepreneurs are pioneers in looking at new types of solutions, but they're also focused on business results. And so they can be effective in convincing policymakers to include new innovative ways of delivering clean water in their policies and in their investment decisions. At the same time, with the private sector, they can provide reassurance to potential investors by demonstrating concrete financial results. And they can also be effective in catalyzing blended finance models whereby philanthropy, public sector investments and business investments come together, which is what we need in order to really bring a major finance into the sector, because it really is quite underfinanced at the moment. Yeah. And so I think social businesses have a key role to play. Within 1001 Fontaine, we're looking at blended finance models. We have been reliant on philanthropy to fund the startup costs of our water kiosks. That has enabled us to deploy a large number of water kiosks and demonstrate the operational and financial sustainability of the model. But as we go forward, we're looking to leverage that philanthropy with different kinds of financing to bring more investment into the sector. And lastly, we're getting more involved in advocacy with national and local authorities to really get them to think about their paradigm for water, particularly for drinking water, and change the paradigm from thinking just about investing in piped water systems as the national strategy, but encourage them to look at more blended models where they can see the complementarity of different water solutions, and including water solutions provided by business operators.
Interesting that you should highlight financing. One of the 4 transformational goals in the new Wateraid strategy is all around financing, and stated an ambition that 15 billion is required to be raised across the globe for financing, obviously not by us. A huge need is required on that. So Claire, from a Wateraid perspective, what action and solutions are needed, would you say?
I mean, something we've been working on over the last couple of years is the conundrum of how do you work with governments to make sure in countries they can get beyond an almost whack-a-mole situation of tackling disaster after disaster and just trying to recoup themselves and actually get ahead of the game. And we're actually piloting something called the Resilient Water Accelerator, for a funky name, which is really about how do you incubate really good plans that can lead into bankable proposals that can get the kind of financing in. So it's really, we're working with businesses, we're working with banks, we're working with governments, working with other experts in the field to basically go into countries and be able to provide the data, the design, the kind of planning and proposals needed to be able to go, this is what a country needs if it is going to have a good adaptation plan and process and make sure there is sustainable water supplies for years to come. and then taking that and then being able to try and unlock climate financing particularly, but other forms of financing as well, to be able to fund that. So it's how do you take all the pools of financing out there and put it behind one thing that's backed well, and it has that kind of robustness of planning and detail that's needed to make sure that businesses and agriculture and communities are able to thrive in the years to come. And that's something we're really trying to promote and work on in the next few years, which is a really exciting initiative to be doing with a number of others.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Rosemary, Natalie, Claire, thank you very much. Hopefully I speak on behalf of everyone to say you've given us some really good food for thought to take us into our solution circles in a moment. So please do take a break and get a drink and a refreshment, and we'll be back here. Maybe if someone can remind me of what time we need to sit back at the tables. In 10 minutes. So 10 minutes, if you could then sit back down at your tables, and I'll talk you through the question that we're going to be asking you to discuss. Thank you.